First of all, can I say thank you very much for inviting me here today. I've been coming to CCN for about 8 or 9 years and managed to avoid speaking in any of that time. So unfortunately, I eventually got the short straw and I'm having to speak. But genuinely, it is a pleasure to talk to CCN. And I have found these gatherings over the last 8 years invaluable because actually, as a leader of a rural unitary council, we face the same issues. All rural unitary councils and county councils, it is all about adult social care, children's social care in a rural environment. And that's the great thing about being here. We can share those ideas and we can share how we solve those problems. As I keep saying to my chief executive, I don't want you to come up with any new ideas. I want you to go and copy a great idea that someone else has done, because that is a lot cheaper and a lot faster. So that's the point of this gathering, I think, more than anything, is to learn and share those values. David just mentioned about collaboration and working together, and I have to say, the spending round, I think, is one of the great successes we've had as a local government sector, working together across tier, across geography, and across party. And the reason we got a good settlement, and it was a good settlement, it was the best settlement we had in 10 years. I know we've got a very big hole, but it's the first time in 10 years that that hole got a bit smaller rather than a bit bigger. And that was because we cooperated. We didn't have the infighting about, we need more of the cake. It was all about getting a bigger cake. And that went down a lot easier with government, and we were able to put the thumbscrews on the likes of Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor. And I have to say, our Secretary of State did a very good job for us as well. And I think CCN, and when we work well together, it's good that you have the attack troops. And I think CCN was very much at the front, sort of lobbying hard, making the case very publicly. And that created the space for us in the LGA to sort of quietly do the backroom stuff of, well, you're aware of the issue in adult social care, what are you going to do it? And I think that sort of tandem working or pincer movement is very important. So that was a great success. And, in terms of joint working, I mean, the recent report done by CCN on children's home-to-school transport and the potential cost of 1.2 billion by 2024. I can say from my conversations with ministers, that's getting through. They know it's a problem. They know they've got to do something about it. And actually having something raised as a problem means we can then start talking about solutions. And in the same way, I think one of the biggest successes of the spending round was not the extra money. That was very, very welcome. But it was the fact that they actually determined for the first time that there was a problem to be solved. So if you look at higher needs, yes, it's about money, but it's about things like perverse incentives. It's about arbitration panels that look at the best interests of the child and rather than the best interests of children. And having a commission, and Tony's here today, who are going to be looking at and advising on how can we make the system better so that it's more sustainable in the future is key. And that's where we need to go in the future. How can we make adult social care more sustainable? How can we get our sector to work with the health sector, to work with housing, to make adult social care more sustainable? Yes, we'll need more money, but if we keep operating to the same model, we'll keep having the same problems. And I'll come more to that in the moment. First of all, about finance, a key recognition that we need the right amount of money and we need certainty. It is a lot harder to plan on annual settlements. And so we've been pushing very, very hard that we need a 4, 5, 10-year settlement horizon. The NHS has 10 years. Why haven't we got 10 years? That's what you need in adult social care. We also need fairer funding. I mean, it's very clear that funding is not evenly distributed across the country. And as the pressures have changed, and actually adults and children's are the high pressure areas, that's changed from the past where maybe deprivation was a bigger factor. So we need fairer funding, but the one thing I would urge everyone to do is the mantra is about evidence-based. And if we can get that commitment across the sector that we want to be evidence-based, we'll get it through the system. If we end up fighting each other, we will just do what the Chancellor normally does, which is just cut the overall budget. So I think that's very important. And also business rates retention. And I know we had some conversations at the LGA a week or two ago about this. There are some risks with business rates retention because that is a slightly regressive historic model. But that's what's on the table. And if we want to get control of our budgets, and control of our funding, that's the opportunity. But we need to do it in a way that secures us against the government immediately handing us the funding and then deciding to do a complete reform of business rates. And also conscious that with the internet and other things, that you are going to change the dynamics of business rates. So we need the protection, but it's only right that the opportunity is there and that we should seize it. I look through on things like Brexit, and I'm sure Kevin's somewhere in the audience here who is doing a fantastic, sorry, no, he's doing a terrible job. No, he's doing a great job as chair of the Brexit board. And I think that's, again, an example of where government has come to us and is truly engaging. You know, when Kevin demands that we need a certain minister or a certain civil servant there because there's a particular issue, then James Brokenshire and now Robert Jenrick have made that minister turn up. And again, across the sector, we've done the right thing. We're not arguing about whether Brexit's a good or a bad thing. This is about preparing for the if. And that's what we've managed to do, I think, very successfully. And I've also got to praise a number of other leaders who've come in and actually raised particular issues, whether it's Paul Carter about the ports in Kent and getting documentation, and others, you know, whether it's Immingham or various other small ports. So I think that's a very good job that we've done. And also, you know, raising the Joint Prosperity Fund, which, you know, we do want the money to come back from Europe and not reside in Whitehall. We want it to move all the way down to us. And I think that's absolutely key. And we can demonstrate time and again that money invested in us is much better value than money invested in Whitehall. I just mentioned children's services a little bit earlier, and I'm just going through the various priorities for the LGA. You know, in children's services, I think we do a great job. And our job is not just to protect children, it is to give them a bright future. It's about enhancing their lives. And that's slightly different from just safeguarding. And we need to be given the tools to do that. And so we have things like Ofsted, and I'm very pleased that we continue to get more good and more outstanding councils across the country, in particular county councils and unitaries. We are doing a good job, but the Ofsted system is somewhat broken. I don't know what your views are, but my view is the inspection regime is, okay, reasonable enough, but it's not very good in terms of then delivering a good outcome. So what happens if a council is poorly performing and beginning to fail? It seems that we have to wait until it fails, we stick in commissioners, we throw lots of money at it, and it continues to fail. We need a better system, and I think one of the things that the LGA has done with its improvement offer is actually we've come up with a system that doesn't just inspect, it actually comes up with good solutions. And one of the things that we're certainly talking to government about is how do we change that? How do we have an Ofsted regime that helps, not that just inspects? And in the same way, when we look at schools, and I have to pay praise to my Labour colleague, the leader of Newcastle, Nick Forbes, who came up with a great term, zombie schools. There are academies out there that are failing, that there is no willing, good or outstanding academy to partner. And they're just withering on the vine. Our children are too important for that, and we need to find a solution. The obvious solution is to allow good or outstanding local authority schools to partner them. And that's something that we're pushing for. I know that might be politically a little difficult, but we need to find a solution because there are too many schools where that is. Now, personally, I quite like academisation. It works in many areas, but we need to find a solution for where they fail. And that is something that we are very much pushing. In the same way, on health, and very much if you're trying to improve the health of a person, you know, that's a local issue. How can you prevent them being ill? I don't know about you, but I don't know many people who want to go to hospital. They'd rather not be ill or not break their hip or whatever it is. And therefore, we ought to be investing in prevention. And I have to say, actually is still the current health secretary for a couple more weeks. You know, Matt Hancock genuinely believes in prevention. We need to get that prevention agenda that we spend more money stopping people being ill than we do curing them. And that is key. We need to invest in our communities. And it's not just about health prevention. You know, somebody may get asthma or the flu because they're living in an inappropriate home with mold growing up the wall. Finding the right housing solution is every bit as important as giving them medicines. So that's good. And I think one of the best bit of work that I got involved in the last year was in public health. We produced a document that clearly demonstrated that public health coming to local government was a huge success. You know, with a 20% reduction in funding, we still have managed to show that I think it's 80 of the 150 or so KPIs improved, 20 or 30 of them went down, the rest were evens. That is a better outcome than the health sector delivers. And because we were able to do that, we were able to demonstrate to the government, who were then able to use that internally, for us to keep public health. And I was very pleased that in the settlement, we actually saw a slight increase in funding for public health, which was a fantastic change and demonstration of what we've done. Coming to the final point, which I think is devolution, I keep using the analogy that, you know, if you have a person or a place, they're local. And you cannot have 15 Whitehall departments with the umpteen silos in each of them delivering a service to a person. You don't get coordination, you don't get efficiency, you don't get it done well. And the people who can deliver that are local councils, and they are CCN members, they are unitary members. We need devolution to the local place, because that's how we will deliver. And that's not just devolution as in giving us the powers, it's giving us the influence over some of our partner services, whether that's the Ministry of Justice, whether it's DWP, whether it's the skills agenda. We need to be able to influence how our communities are shaped. And that's why things like the Council's CAN campaign is so important. How we successfully deliver more effectively, more efficiently 800 services to our residents than any other part of the government sector. And if we can get more of those services, we will deliver even more effectively and more efficiently. And I think that's crucial. And we are now pushing for government to think differently, to actually start thinking about not what is the governance structure, but what is the opportunity. What is it that they can devolve down to us? So the conversation starts with, here's the opportunity, not, are you going to set up a mayor? And it is quite clear that while a mayor may work very well in places like Manchester, you know, where you have a small number of councils that are all unitary, that are focused on a single area, it clearly needs a different model in Hampshire or in Kent or in Essex or Lancashire, because it is different. And you know, we just have to accept that. Mayors do not work everywhere. We need a different model and we need a different type of deal. But we cannot have a situation where we have, you know, 150 bespoke deals. We need government to basically put on the table a matrix that says, here are the powers that we are willing to consider to be devolved, and here are the questions that you have to answer. If you want planning powers, if you want spatial strategies, then you have to be able to deliver this. If you want to have more health powers, then you need something that's coterminous with your health system. So ask us the question, let us provide the answer, rather than telling us that the answer is a mayor. So I come back to, at the end of the day, what are we asking government for? We're asking for the right level of funding. We're asking for the flexibilities for us to do our own thing and be trusted by local government. And whether it's David Fothergill who wants to charge a little bit more for the average bus pass in order that there actually is a bus in Somerset, or whether it's, you know, somebody else who wants to charge a tourist tax so he can actually fund decent tourist infrastructure, that's a local decision. And if you get it wrong, your voters will tell you. You do not need a civil servant. So funding, flexibility, empowerment, trust us and trust our electorate is what I am pushing for government. And with that, thank you very much for listening.
So we've got the opportunity for a handful of questions. I'd like to take questions from the floor. So if you can indicate, we've got the bright lights on us, so it's a bit difficult. But if you can indicate, we'll bring a mic to you, and then if you can stand up and ask your question. Is that Martin? Yeah. So Martin.
Hello, James. You talked about fairer funding, and obviously we've had to accept in a world of cuts, it's very difficult for those councils like mine or many others in this room who are unfairly funded and have to accept that we get half the support, say, London gets. And the LJ has actually stuck to that line. So obviously as budgets increase, will the LGA now accept that as budgets increase, those areas which have currently been poorly funded will be allowed to catch up? So that, the excuse that it's all cutting, we can't do it, won't wash anymore, and I think that's a key question. So what should happen is the likes of Inner London should get a bit more, and the likes of Leicestershire, Lincolnshire, Northamptonshire should get a lot more.
So,
will the LGA support that?
I'm going to be slightly diplomatic here. I think the key point here is, and the mantra that I have pushed along the whole time, is that the LGA is pushing for an evidence-based funding system. And I genuinely think that most people can buy into an evidence-based funding system. I think it gets a lot more difficult when you start arguing A versus B versus C. If you say, follow the evidence, and the evidence gives you an answer, and you're absolutely right, it's a lot easier for government and for everybody to give somebody a bit extra and someone a bit more extra. It's really difficult to take from someone and give to someone else. And I am hopeful, in effect, we have the funding settlement this year, and I hope we get another good funding settlement. In an environment where there is increasing funding, then it's going to be a lot easier to do that.
A couple of things I'd add, Martin. One is that there's quite an interesting dynamic. Obviously, we've got new ministers, new ministerial team, the team that were there before the dissolution, and we've got Luke Hall as the local government minister. How shall I put it? I think we've been encouraged by officials to engage with ministers in order to ensure that what they have been working on is at the forefront of ministers' minds. So I found that really encouraging, I have to say. The second thing is that I think, as we saw with the social care settlement, there is still a commitment towards equalisation. So there are a few authorities in this room that didn't share in the billion. We've shared in the 850 million. And I think that's one mechanism that MHCLG would probably still want to use or to recognise, which may help with those authorities which historically are underfunded. Any more questions? If anybody who wants to ask a question can put their hand up, and then we'll get microphones to all of you. Any more? Yes, so just beyond Martin.
Thank you. Liz Brighouse, I'm leader of the opposition in Oxfordshire County Council. I'm really interested in some of the issues that you raised around academies. And of course, for many local authorities, all local authorities are responsible for basic need, responsible for getting children into schools. And yet they have no responsibility when it comes to actually getting children into academies. And given what you have said about Ofsted this afternoon, which I welcome, would you support a policy which actually asked or devolved to local government who were with the responsibility for education, who devolved the inspection and the support needed for schools so that we didn't have some of these problems? And that wouldn't just be our own county schools, but all schools. All academies would be responsible in the same way to local government in relation to both inspection and to the support that they needed to deliver, but also in relation to their admissions policies and issues around exclusion of children. Thank you.
So, I mean, just to clarify, my comments on Ofsted relate to Ofsted inspection of children's services, not to schools. Ofsted inspections of schools, I think this is a personal view, I'm not sure what the LGA view is, I think is a good thing and is largely working. But I do think that we have a number of responsibilities in and around schools where we don't have the levers to actually influence some of those. And there clearly needs to be a little bit of rebalancing, not necessarily a massive rebalancing, that actually enables us to do our job.
Any more? Final question before we wrap up? Any more? If not, it just remains for me to thank you, James, for
thank you very much.
Coming along and sharing your observations with us, and for the partnership working that we will continue to deliver, be it on the 6th floor or the 5th floor at Smith Square.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.